This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 55.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba. Ramsey does not like jewelry, including his wedding band. However, he is married with children.
Hello, SE Nation, and welcome back to another episode. Thank you guys for being here. I'm very happy to have you, and I'm happy that you're listening. And from the messages that I'm getting, that this show is actually providing value. It brings joy to my life, knowing that I'm actually helping other people. So I'm doing this for selfish reasons, I guess. And for selfish reasons, I reached out to a gentleman named Andrew Tarvin. Now, Andrew is the first guest on this show who's been on a TED Talk stage. If you're not familiar with TED Talk is, just go on YouTube and Google it. It's people like Tim Ferriss, Jocko Willink, Simon Sinek have been on those stages and given speeches, useful speeches, not just they're useful speeches that I enjoyed. And Andrew was no exception, to the point where I actually reached out to him because I wanted to talk to him. Andrew, we'll dig deeper into his history in a second, but Andrew is an engineer who is no longer working in engineering, but helps people with humor. So I'm going to leave it at that. All the show notes can be found at wethesalesengineers.com/show55. So let's talk to Andrew. Good afternoon, Andrew. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am good. So you are kind of a famous person, at least to me. And I found you on TED Talk talking about engineering and comedy.
Mm-hmm.
I will link the TED Talk in the show notes. But for those listeners who don't know who you are, do you mind just giving a brief overview of what you do and where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely happy to do that. And it's funny that you say I'm a famous person. I don't feel like a famous person at all. But for the people that don't know me, my background is that I am an engineer. So I have a degree in computer science and engineering from the Ohio State University. After I graduated, spent 6 years at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager. And as an engineer, I've always been obsessed with efficiency, trying to do things as efficiently as possible. I've recently discovered that for myself, getting dressed in the morning, if you put on sock, shoe, that's faster than sock, shoe, if that makes sense. Right, so you put one sock on and then that shoe on and then the other sock and then the other shoe on. That's a little bit faster. And that's one of the things that I think about of like, how do I do things as efficiently as possible? How do I shortcut, maybe 5 seconds every morning? So I've always been obsessed with efficiency. That's lend itself to the engineering kind of background. But at P&G, realized that you can't be efficient with humans. Because humans have emotions and feelings. And a lot of times we want to just get to the point. Like, I remember as a project manager, I wanted to send emails that were like, do this thing, right? I know what they needed to do. I wanted them to just execute, but that's like programming a computer. We can't actually do that. Instead, we send emails that are like, hey, so-and-so, hope you had a great weekend, hoping you could do this thing by this date for this reason, see you at the happy hour later. Sincerely yours truly, XO, whatever, right?
Yep.
For me, as a stereotypical engineer, I didn't necessarily have the skill set that I needed to be effective with people. So you can't be efficient with people, you have to be effective. But luckily for me, in college, I started doing improv and stand-up comedy and realized that some of the things that I had learned at improv and stand-up were actually some of the things that were helping me be more effective in the workplace. So I started to explore that intersection of humor in the workplace and improv in business. That led me to starting my own company called Humor That Works. And now I work with organizations, in a lot of cases with engineers, with tech people, on how to use humor to get better results, right? It's not just about having more fun in what we do. That's a small component of it. But for me, I use it as a way to get results and to work with the hardest resource that I've ever had to work with, which is other humans.
Awesome. So I've never thought about putting sock shoe on, mainly because I put my socks on, then half hour later I put on my shoes. Call me crazy. But I'll have to try that out.
And for some people, I have heard for people who really like skinny or tight pants, they have to put their socks on before they put pants on, so it doesn't really work for them. But for my unique case, it's one of the many small things I do to try to be more efficient.
All right, I think we're going to change the show from we the sales engineers to we who put on clothes. All right. So I liked what you said. You can't be efficient with people. You have to be effective. And being sales engineers, as I mentioned to you before we started the recording, we talk to people all the time. Mm-hmm. And one of the major struggles that engineers have are they are efficient with how they get the information across. So how you mentioned you started with like improv to start your journey into becoming effective and efficient. Why did you start with improv to begin with?
So I started with improv in college because my best friend wanted to start an improv comedy group, needed people, and basically forced me to join. And it didn't take too much kind of prodding, but it wasn't a thing like, hey, I'm going to take improv so that I get better skills in the workplace or so that I become funnier. Like it wasn't, I saw a show and I wanted to do it. It was more that I was encouraged into it. And it was later that I saw the application because I realized that, I was incredibly nervous before the first show. And then after subsequent shows, the nervousness kind of went away. And I realized once I got to P&G, I was no longer nervous for doing presentations because I'd done improv before. And so a presentation was easy, like having a script and having some slides and no expectation of being funny. All of those things made it easier because I had done the harder work of, say, improv before that. And the other thing is that I'm an introvert. So if you know Myers-Briggs, I'm INTJ. And, there's a stereotype that introverts are socially awkward. And that has nothing to do with introversion, right? It just, from a lot of people, it just has to do with repetition, right? So if you think about an extrovert growing up, they tend to have more conversations. They get into conversation with friends or hanging out with friends a lot more. An introvert might be on their computer or reading a book a little bit more often. So the sheer number of conversations that an extrovert has had versus an introvert has had, say by their mid-20s or when they're in their first assignment, an introvert has had a lot more of them. And so improv for me was a safe space to practice the skills of active listening, of being present in the moment, of reacting to what other people said, of explaining things in an interesting way. And that, I think, are the kind of the two components that really helped, was that it was really a safe space to practice, and it worked on harder skills so that when I got into presentations, it made things a lot easier. So it wasn't intentional. It was just kind of something fun to do. Oh, and that's a third benefit, is that it's a lot more fun to do improv than it is to consistently go and do, say, a bunch of presentations or presentation training. All of those things are valuable, but improv is a lot more fun.
No, it's a lot more fun for you and for the listeners. Nobody wants to sit through a presentation. So you mentioned that you practiced. Is that, or did you just jump in front of the audience and practice, or did you practice for months before getting in front of the audience for the first time?
Yeah, no, we practiced quite a bit. So we would, and that was, that's what I brought to the improv team, was what I didn't have in comedy skill, I made up for in comedy project management. I was like, all right, if we're going to do this, we're going to practice 3 times a week. We're going to have a business meeting every Monday. We're going to film all of our shows and go back and watch it as if it was game tape. And so, yeah, we would do a bunch of practices together, and we would do probably, when we were first starting out, we would practice 3 times a week for a month and then do a show once a month. And then as we got more comfortable, we would then have weekly shows in addition to the practice that we would have. And so, yeah, it's just like any skill. And so that's what, is a big belief of mine, is that humor is a skill, which means it can be learned, just as socializing is a skill, sales is a skill. These are all things that we can learn. And one of the keys to learning it, in addition to understanding how it works, the other key is practicing it and repeating it, right? When you were first learning how to walk, you had to fall a couple of times and continue to practice it. Sometimes people as adults, we forget how hard it is to learn something new. We try maybe a joke once, it doesn't work, and we're like, all right, well, that just didn't work. I'm never going to do it again. And it's like, if we did that from us walking, we would all be crawling around because we all failed the first time that we tried to take our first step. So it absolutely, practice and repetition is a key part of learning any skill, including the skill of humor.
When you're learning new skills, you generally can track when you're getting better. For example, on the guitar, you can track it. How can you track being funny?
That's a good question, and it's a tough thing to track. There is the kind of intangible feeling of like, how did it feel, right? Did you feel good from the stand-up show that you did, or the improv show that you did, or the presentation that you did, in terms of what response you got? And then also you can record yourself. So I record almost every set that I do, almost every speech that I do. And I go back and can listen to it and be like, all right, how many laughs did I get? And did this joke that I try actually work? Or you can also do the kind of tracking of what business results are you getting? Are people more engaged, or is it leading to more sales or more engagement or more questions, or are people paying attention a little bit more? You can kind of gauge that yourself in terms of what is the end result as a as a byproduct of you doing some of these things.
You practice,
Mm-hmm.
and then you do a test.
Yep.
And the test for you would be jumping in front of 100 people and making them laugh.
Yeah, sometimes it's 100 people, sometimes it's 5. In the open mic world, when first starting out, it's sometimes less than that. Sometimes material that you're testing, maybe you share it with a couple of friends and see if they laugh, or you post it on Twitter and see if there's if people kind of respond to it or react to it. So there's multiple ways to test it, but for sure, yeah, you practice a little bit, you have an idea, you get it out into the world. It's just like agile project management, right? It's just like agile development, that you want to iterate. It's not about coming up with something that's completely perfect and then trying to present it to the world. It's an iterative approach.
Okay. The reason I'm asking you all this, just so you know where I'm coming from, generally speaking, we as SEs, we have a demonstration or a presentation that we need to do. We slap together a quick presentation or a demo, like on the plane going somewhere, and then we practice it once in the hotel, and then we go jump in front of the customer and wonder why it didn't go well. So what you're saying is that take your time, do it ahead of time, and maybe you could iterate in front of your sales guy first, or in front of your wife if she wants to listen to that. I don't think my wife would. Basically, practice before you jump in front of a customer, and you're still going to make mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be more comfortable at it, yeah, one of the keys to if you get nervous before presentations, like one of the most effective tools two is, one is kind of the immersion therapy kind of thing of just doing it more, or doing something harder. That's where, like, I think that stand-up is one of the hardest forms of public speaking you'll ever do. And so if you go and do an open mic, doing other presentations will feel a lot easier. But then the other thing is kind of just knowing your material. The more comfortable you are with the material, the more comfortable you will be giving the presentation. Because even if you stumble, if you mess up, if you don't know what it is that you're going to say next, the material enough that when you go to the next slide, you'll then pick up, right? You don't have to worry about standing there for 5 minutes, not having no idea what you're going to say. So the practice helps that level of comfort. The other thing that I would say is as SEs, if you're going to be doing these presentations anyway, you might as well test within the presentations that you're doing, right? Try starting the presentation out with the story and see what resonates with people. And then when you do the story the next time, if it did, try an additional punchline. So rather than just doing the same presentation over and over again or completely new, try incorporating some of the humor as you go along. And maybe it's not perfect that first time, but a year from now, after you've done a number of these, you're going to be a much better presenter. And that's the beauty of learning the skills. As you learn it, it starts to become more second nature, where maybe it's not perfect, but you're going to be a lot more sure of what types of things will work and not work.
The big question I have for you, like, we understand how I kind of understand how you end up practicing, but why should we inject humor?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a couple of ways to kind of approach that. One is from a simple question from my side, so you can answer this question. It's a dumb question, I admit. But would you rather do something that is fun or not fun?
Well, if you ask my wife, she would say not fun, but it's fun for me. I'd rather do something fun for me.
Yeah, you would rather do something fun for you. And what's fun for you might be different than what's fun for someone else. But typically, we as humans would rather do something that is a little bit more fun. So if you were to make your presentation a little bit more fun, a little bit more enjoyable, do you think your clients would be a little bit more engaged? Do you think the potential people that you're selling to might listen a little bit more, right? So we can take that approach, or we can take the numbers approach. Like, we can take that the idea that storytelling, right? Storytelling is an incredible form of communicating information. It's a great way to add humor into a presentation as well. But studies have shown that facts told in story form are 20 times more likely to be remembered than facts told in bullet point form. Or we can look at the consideration that the average person sends and receives 112 emails per day and spends up to 80% of their time in some form of active communication. They're bombarded by 5,000 messages per day. So if you're to actually make something a little bit more fun and engaging, they're actually going to listen more, right? So that there's a great woman named Tammy Evans, and she says that when you get people to laugh, you get them to listen. And when you can get them to listen, you can get them to learn, or you can get them to buy, right? You have to get their attention, and by using humor, we can get their attention from everything else that's competing for their attention so that we can make a sale. So it gets people's attention and improves their understanding and helps them remember things longer. So there's multiple benefits, all backed by research, case studies, real world examples for why using humor.
I've seen that a few times. Whenever I go into a presentation or something, there's two people who want to be there, the rest don't. Mm-hmm. And when I first started, whenever I was too nervous to crack a joke, I could see them falling asleep a little bit by a little. But as soon as I got comfortable and started cracking jokes, they actually got engaged and started asking questions. So who knew?
Yeah. Because it's partially this thing of if you're in a group of people and you're kind of distracted, you're looking at your phone, you're going through emails, but then the person next to you laughs, you're going to stop. You're going to be like, wait, why did you laugh? I want to laugh. I want to have a good time. And so now you're going to listen to what they say. And if they just made you laugh or made the person next to you laugh, you're going to listen to what comes next. That's why I think it was Jeffrey Gitomer who said that at the end of laughter is the height of listening.
Okay, I'm taking a lot of notes here, so I'll come back to that one.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's good. That's my focus as an engineer is that it's hopefully we have some fun anecdotes and things that we can share, but the goal is to help make people more effective.
Okay, so humor also makes. How does humor? I understand how humor makes people listen. How does it make them more effective?
If you get people to pay attention more, if you get people more likely to buy, or if you get them more likely engaged in the work, that's more effective. If you can build rapport with someone so that the next time you need something from them, they're more willing to do something for you, it is more effective. And so the way that I think about it is, there's really 5 skills of work. No matter who you are, what you do, it basically comes down to 5 things. You have to be able to execute, right? You have to be able to complete a task. You have to be able to think strategically, right? Solve problems. You have to be able to communicate. This is one for engineers. It's sometimes challenging because there's so much that some engineers know, but it's hard for them to articulate that in a way that other people understand because they can't always connect it. But you have to be able to communicate in a way that other people understand you. You have to be able to connect on a human level, the emotional empathy or emotional intelligence, empathy, that kind of stuff. And you have to be able to lead. Right? No matter who you are, what you do, it's those 5 things. So whether you are a sales engineer or a dog trainer, right? We've done some work with dog trainers before. It's those 5 skills. And so humor isn't what we say is humor is a missing skill. It's something that we never really learn in school, but it's not what you do, right, but rather how you do it. And when you add humor across those 5 things, right, when you use humor in the way that you execute or in the way that you communicate or in the way that you connect, you become more effective because you get better results. It's not always the most efficient thing, but it is more effective often.
The last point you mentioned, was that lead?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, leadership.
All right. Yep. So as an SE, I usually answer to a sales guy, I have a sales manager, and I have customers. Where am I leading in that aspect?
You're probably trying to convince. So leadership is for me not a position, right? It's not about you necessarily having people that you delegate to, but rather you trying to get people to take action towards a common goal. So as a sales engineer, you're probably trying to lead the client to make a decision to buy, right? So in that way, there is influence as part of it.
Nice. I just wrote a blog post about that. I wrote like a 2,000 word blog post, which you just summarized in 3 words. So I don't really like you right now. All right.
No, but sometimes people need the deeper dive. So that's great.
Thank you. I appreciate you trying to stroke my ego. All right, we understand the why. If someone wants to start, how can I get funnier in an efficient way? Like, people can make jokes all they want and they can go into a territory that's not so good. So how can I get better in an efficient way to help my customers?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways that you can do it. One, the way that I did it was by taking, by doing improv and taking an improv class, and I do think that that's a great option for many people. Either taking an improv class in your local city and just going and learning and starting to see the applications, or hiring a group to come into your organization and teaching improv to like the entire group. So some of our training programs through Humor That Works use applied improvisation as a way to train these skills that we're talking about in a way that is more effective, that also serves as some team building and some opportunities to build together. So taking a class can certainly be part of it. But, my goal was, so if you wanted to get to where I'm at, then it's like, okay, well, then do 10 years of comedy plus 6 years at a large company, combine that together, spend a lot of time researching the value of humor in the workplace, put it together in ideas and all that. Or just reapply the things that I've learned. And that's the point of kind of our website with a bunch of resources on it, or the book that just came out, is to shortcut that process. And even just kind of listening to this podcast, one of the things that you can start with in terms of using humor in the workplace effectively is what we call our humor map. So when you're thinking about using humor, you want to understand your humor map, which is your medium, audience, and purpose, where medium is how are you going to execute that humor, right? Do you do it in an actual sales call with potential clients? Or is it in an email that you're sending afterwards as a follow-up? Is it in the slides themselves? Is it in a phone conversation? Because your medium impacts your message. The next, who is the audience, right? What do they know? What do they need? What do they expect? And what's your relationship to them? Because a joke that you might make with, say, your salesperson that you've known for a couple of years is very different than a joke that you might make with a client that you're meeting for the very first time. And then the most important one is your purpose. Why are you going to use humor? Do you want to use humor to get people to pay attention at the beginning of the meeting? Or do you want to use it to build rapport with the salesperson in between meetings? Do you want to use it to relieve your own stress after a meeting so that you actually become a little bit more recharged and re-engaged in your work? That purpose is going to dictate some of the humor that you might use. And then once you have that understanding and that clarity, you can be okay, like, all right, what are some ways, if I want to use humor to get people to pay attention at the beginning of my meeting, what are some ways that I can do that? We have some resources on some ideas for that. But in general, it's like, if you start with a story that's relevant but also engaging and connect that back to what you're talking about later, that's one way to get people to pay attention. Another in presentations is to use images, right? Instead of a wall full of text or just a demo of the solution that you're sharing, share some images in there and then connect how this image of, from of a dog smiling, right? See how, like, hey, look, this is kind of like how our customer feels after our events, and then boom, move to the next thing. But people are going to pay attention if there's a dog smiling on the screen, because it's just something like, wait, I'm not normally expecting that in a meeting. So by understanding that map and then kind of taking that next step of like, okay, how can I achieve that purpose with humor? That's a simple way to kind of get started with using humor in the workplace.
I'm going to have to use the last 5 minutes and just listen to it in a loop over and over. You've already mentioned your website. Do you mind repeating that so people can find what your website and go to your website?
Yeah, so the website is humorthatworks.com. We have a number of blog posts there. There's a newsletter you can sign up for. There's resources for individuals. So if you're just an individual person looking to incorporate humor, great. There's also resources there if you're part of an organization and want to do it. But my goal is, as an engineer, and I think many engineers are like this, I found something that worked. Other people weren't doing it. And so I wanted to teach other people to do it, partially so that I would benefit. Like at P&G, I was tired of being in boring meetings. And I could only control my own meetings, but it's like, if I teach them how to lead better meetings, I will experience better meetings. And so then that has, broadened. And so my goal is anyone who wants to try to use humor to be more effective, we have some type of level of resource for it. So plenty of free resources on the website. The book that just came out is kind of the what, why, and how of humor in the workplace. That's like $15 or $10 on Kindle or something. So we have all these different resources of varying levels of levels that you want to get involved with it, basically, as a starting point.
And the book is called Humor That Works?
Yep. Yeah. So the book is also called Humor That Works, The Missing Skill for Success and Happiness at Work. That information can be found at humorthatworks.com as well. It's also on Amazon and things like that. But then that's also the benefit of podcasts like this. Like you said, if there's something that's interesting to you, come back and listen to this into a section to think about how you can start to incorporate some of these ideas.
Well, I personally like to read, and I saw your book, and it's on the list. I have a book club on my website, and I'm gonna add that to the list of reading on my, just because I've never seen anyone talk about humor, especially for sales engineers.
Yeah, and there are a couple of books out there on humor, and many of them are good, but none of them kind of serve the purpose that I wanted, which was how to actually do it in the workplace. Some talk about the theory, some talk about specifically how to be funny, like say as a stand-up comedian. But for me, I didn't see anything that was actionable that people could say, okay, like now that I've read this and I've read the 10 humor strategies, I know how I can behave differently when I go into work tomorrow.
Okay, so it'll be added to the list. And I just want to note that I'm pretty much started this podcast for the same reason you started your website, is for me to learn and, and hopefully help some other folks. You already mentioned you're an introvert. I'm an introvert. I know a bunch of people who are introverts, but a lot of sales engineers are also extroverts, which is how they got to be sales engineers, because they enjoy talking to people. How would they benefit from something like working on their humor?
Well, I think that when people do our programs, a lot of the feedback that we get from more introverted people is typically, some people say, hey, I love this. I didn't think that it could be funny, but you showed that it was a skill. You broke it apart in terms of how it works. And now I understand it a little bit better, right? When you think about the map, or if you understand some of the humor tools that we talk about. So they get that feedback. The other feedback that we get is that sometimes for extroverts, people will say, I appreciated the training because I've always been able to make people laugh. I just didn't know why. And so now that I understand why people are laughing, I can be more intentional about doing it. And so that's sometimes what extroverts can get. So maybe they're naturally, pretty funny, or they can kind of get a laugh, but if they're not exactly sure why people are laughing or when they laugh, by being more intentional about it, you can then amp it up a little bit, or intentionally dial it down if you need to or want to create kind of like an emotional change in a presentation. It just allows you to wield the tool a little bit more effectively if you're understanding how it actually works.
So it makes it repeatable, basically.
Exactly.
And like being an extrovert doesn't necessarily mean you're funny. It just means you enjoy talking to people. So
exactly.
I wouldn't conflate the two.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a great clarification, right? Introversion, extroversion has nothing to do with how funny you are or social ability. It's just in how you recharge.
So I had a bunch of questions prepared in series on like what people can do to start getting funny, but you kind of listed them all off in one shot. You're making my job very hard, which I do appreciate, because I don't have to say a word while you're talking. If someone's afraid to start, you mentioned like do an improv class. What's an improv class like? Like, if I'm afraid to actually go on stage and talk about it and like do something in front of people, why would I go to an improv class?
Well, an improv class is a safe space, right? If you are wanting to learn how to improve your speaking skills, then it seems like the worst place to try to improve those speaking skills would be in front of a client where the stakes are higher, right? Yeah. A safer space, whether that's Toastmasters as a way to just kind of practice, or an improv class, the benefit is that, your job is not on the line in an improv class. You don't have to get a result. In an improv class, typically, depending on where you are, it's going to be about 8 to maybe 12 to 15 to 20 people in a group. It's a private classroom, and then you're going to learn some warm-up activities. You're going to do them together, the warm-up activities all together as a group. And then you may do some scenes with each other, where you might get 2 people up and they start to improvise a scene, and then the other people are watching. So you have a little bit of the audience, but the audience is of people who are also going to do the same thing. And so the stakes feel a little bit lower, because it's not like they're recording. It's not like someone that is in the audience. It's just kind of a group of other people who have to go through the same thing. And so it's that safe space to start to practice, and you start to get a little bit more comfortable. And then over a series of time, you do that. So that's like a regular improv class if you're going to sign up individually by yourself. You can also hire people who do what's called applied improvisation. So that's some of the programs that we do, but there's also plenty of other people out there in the world in a number of different cities that teach applied improvisation. And the benefit to an applied improv class is that, one, you can do it as an organization. So you can get together and say, hey, let's get our sales engineers together. We're going to practice this stuff. And there it's typically less about presentational. It's not, hey, get up and do some scenes, but more often it's like, hey, let's do this activity. And then we're going to talk specifically about how this activity translates to better sales skills or to better communication skills. And it's not about putting anyone on the spot. It's just a way to practice some of the skills that we're talking about. Like, to me, it's kind of silly that sometimes we listen to speakers on communication, and they'll talk about the importance of listening, and the whole time they're just talking to you, right?
It's hard.
You're never actually practicing some of the things that they're talking about. So you can use an improv exercise that then helps you practice some of the skills of listening or of active listening, so that you're actually getting, you're building your skill set while also learning about it.
Is there a way someone can start on their own? Or would you advise against that?
There are some things that you can do kind of on your own. I think that improvisation, just like having a sales conversation, like you're very rarely going to have a sales conversation just on your own. So the application doesn't translate quite as well, but there's still stuff that you can do. Because improvisation is not about being funny. Improvisation is about reacting honestly in the moment. So if you get better at presence of just kind of looking at the world around you, that's all stuff that you can do on your own. In fact, I think I'll check. I might even have an article on the website about some solo improv exercises, or you can even type in solo improv exercises. So you can do things to kind of challenge yourself to say, okay, how can I work on some of these skills? How can I, maybe go out into the world, and I'm going to give myself the challenge to try to notice things that are red. And just by kind of giving yourself that idea, you activate the reticular activation system, right? Which is just basically a fancy word for that phenomenon that, like if you get a car, or you're someone that gets a specific car, yeah, you see it everywhere.
Yeah.
It's reticular activation system, RAS. It's just kind of attuning your brain to start to notice that detail a little bit more. That changes your presence, so you can do that proactively for yourself to be like, all right, I just want to notice certain things. This is the value of, say, a comedian having a humor notebook, is when they start to write humor, start to look for humor in the world around them, they start to see it even more because they've just activated that. So that's something easy that anyone can do on their own, is start a humor notebook and start to kind of write down, things that they find curious, things that make them go, huh, that's kind of interesting.
So you mentioned a little bit, you didn't say the word, but I also read it on your website, wit, like having a quick wit. And you on your website, I think I read that you can actually develop a wit. Like,
yep.
I don't know if I can ask how, because then we might be here forever. But is that actually possible to build a quick wit if someone thinks that they don't have that?
Yeah, it is, because so there's an art and science to humor, I think, right? And so we try to help break down what the science looks like, and then you have to practice the art. So in our workshops, we give people an opportunity to practice the art, but you can practice the art on your own, right? With some of the solo exercises and things that we're talking about. So the science is a structure to comedy. So wit is kind of being able to say something in the moment that's kind of funny. So part of that is the presence that I talked about, reacting honestly in the moment. The second part of that is understanding things like structure, like comedic structure. So, for example, where you put the punchline. So every joke is kind of like joke at the most basic form, which is only one form of comedy, which is also only one form of humor. So that's one thing to also clarify, is that humor is more broad than comedy. So when we're talking about humor in the workplace, yes, it does include comedy. And so if that's what people want, they want to make people laugh, they want to be seen as funny, that's a certain skill set. But also, if they want to use humor to get better results, it doesn't have to be that high of a bar. It could also just be doing something a little bit different that gets people to pay attention, right? But when it comes specifically to wit, jokes have a structure of setup and punchline, where the setup gives you a certain idea, and then a punchline kind of breaks that expectation. And with that, comedy is a little bit of a language, is a conversation. So I say something, and then I need to leave a long enough pause for you to laugh. Otherwise, if I keep talking, you're not going to laugh because you're trying to listen to what I'm saying next. So you want to structure things correctly. So for example, there's a great, I think it's a Mel Brooks quote that says, happiness is having a caring, close-knit, tight family in another city, right? Which is a pretty good line. If that line was happiness is having a family in another city who is caring, close-knit, and tight, it's not a very good joke, right?
Yeah.
Because it changes the punchline and you don't know when to laugh and you keep talking, right? So learning something like the structure of comedy, that with the repetition and building it as a skill, plus learning the ability to be more present and react honestly in the moment, those two things kind of coming together help you to develop wit. And one of the things that I think can help encourage people is, I don't know if you've ever had this experience where maybe you've been in a meeting, something's happened, and then like 4 hours later, you're driving home or you're in the shower or you're doing something else and you're like, this is what I should have said.
Yes, all the time.
Right? Yeah. So that's actually a good thing, right? So that's something called staircase wit, staircase humor. Okay. It's the idea that, you know, the aha or the haha moment happened in the stairwell. Well, if on reflection, as you think about that, the more you think about it, it's like, okay, why would I have said that? How would that have worked? When our similar situation where I could say something similar to that, as you reflect on it and practice it, you take that haha moment from happening 4 hours later to only 3 hours later to only 2 hours later to only 10 minutes later to then happening in the moment, right? Because reflection on the past leads to action in the future. So as you reflect back on these sales meetings, these meetings that you go to or that you give, you want to reflect on it. You want to record things so you can listen back to it. And then you can say, if I had done this, that would have worked a little bit differently. That might have worked better. Then the next time that experience happens, it's in your mind to do it more immediately.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about, kind of this deliberate practice that gets you to building that skill over time.
I like it. So, generally speaking, the interview takes longer. I have another section that's, I call it the not so fire round, but you are efficient and effective in your answers that I'm out of questions. So we're going to move on to the not so fire round.
Okay, great.
But I have a feeling you're going to do it in a fire round succession. So these are 4 questions I ask most of my guests whenever I have time. So what's the one thing you love about doing what you do?
The biggest thing that I think that I love about what I do is that when I left P&G, I was rated well, and people at least seemed to like working with me. But when I left, another project manager filled in what I did. And what I like about what I do is that no one writes humor that works. No one creates a company humor that works if I don't do it. And so I like that I'm kind of creating something that wouldn't exist otherwise, or at least wouldn't exist in this form if it wasn't for me creating it or adding my stamp to it. So that I think is one of the things that I like. And then the other thing, of course, is kind of the sappy side, is that I do like helping people start to enjoy their work more. I like when I'm efficient and effective. And so I like when I can help make other people the same thing.
Yeah, well, you are changing lives, like to a degree, right? By providing whatever it is that you are providing. So, good job.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, and that's one of the things I did have to learn. If you look at the YouTube comments on my TEDx video, it's very funny because many of them are positive, but then some of them are like, "Oh my God, this is hilarious! I so much needed this. This guy is so funny." And then there's many comments that are also like, "He's really not." He's not funny, or he's formulaic. And I'm recognizing that I don't have to be everything for everyone. Yeah. But instead, for the certain type of people that, kind of connect and resonate with what I say, I want to continue to share that message. And for me, I'm lucky because I did the calculation. I have a 97% like to dislike ratio on the YouTube kind of like and dislike comments. So I feel okay about that.
You are an engineer. Okay.
Yeah.
So next question. Before I ask it, I do want to say what I like about what you have done is that, okay, the next question is, if there's one thing about your job that you would change, what would it be? But before you answer that, I want to comment on that. Many people go through their jobs and with a lot of things that they don't like and never try to change it. You didn't like what what was happening to you in your old job, and you changed it and you made a career out of it. And now that I've answered the question for you, do you have another answer to this question?
Yeah, well, yeah, so absolutely. I mean, I think that people say if you find something that you're passionate about and that becomes your work, you're incredibly fortunate. And I do feel incredibly fortunate that I'm very passionate about what I do. But I think a lot of people discount the reality that even if you're not super passionate about what it is that you do, it's not your lifelong dream. You can still find ways to make it a lot more fun, right? I've enjoyed every job that I've had because I've found ways to make them fun. They haven't been the best jobs. I was a cart pusher for a while. I worked in a factory. Like, there's a whole slew of things that I've done, but I've always found fun in what I've done. But the flip is also true. So even when you find something that you really, really love, there's going to be things that you don't enjoy. So for example, I don't like sending out proposals. I don't like sending out contracts. I don't like the work of, finding a company's logo and putting it into the Word doc and then changing the dates and putting in the details and all that. And so in the past I've changed to say, okay, I'm going to do that all in bulk together, and I'm going to listen to positive music that I like to make it a little bit more bearable. And then now I'm fortunate that I'm getting to the stage that I can now delegate it to my assistant, that I don't have to do it. Right. But there's going to be, I think every job, there's going to be things that you don't love, but you can always try to find an approach to at least make it a little bit more enjoyable.
I'm a sales engineer and I love what I do. A lot of what I do is pick up boxes, open them, and rack servers. And that is not fun. I'm a big guy and I can carry heavy weights, but it's not fun to be doing that for your job. I'd rather do it at the gym.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and so with that, it's like, okay, one, long term, how do you potentially get out of that as a role if you don't like it? And two, in the short term, like, how do you make that more fun? Can you listen to music while you do it? Can you do it with someone that you enjoy working with and you can kind of commiserate and chat with each other while you're doing it? Or can you set up, hey, I know this is a thing that I have to do. I don't enjoy it. So I'm going to give myself a small reward after every single time that I have to do it. And that small reward could be simple. It could be a small piece of chocolate, or it could be, I'm going to listen to a comedy podcast on my way home. It's like, there's small things that you can do for yourself. And it's, it lends itself to one of my big beliefs, is that I think you are responsible for your own happiness. I don't think that you're always in control of it. And certainly with mental health issues and things like that, it's not to say that it should be easy and that it's that you can control it completely, but I think you are responsible for it. So if there are things that you do that you don't like in doing, it's up to you to find ways either to change what you're doing or to change your perspective about them.
I like that last part, change the perspective about them, because sometimes you can't do anything about it,
right.
but you can change how you think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Awesome. Question number 3. Other than your book, is there a resource or a book that you would recommend to sales engineers to read?
Great question. So there's probably a number of them. Depends on kind of the area. So I don't consider myself very much a salesperson, but there's a great book called Exactly How to Sell by Phil Jones. That is a great primer if you don't like sales, a great primer for setting up. He's basically, the idea is that a salesperson, all you're doing as a salesperson is earning the right to make a recommendation. It's not about tricking them with some, influence technique. It's not about this. It's just earning the right to earn a recommendation. So he has a great structured process for that. Similarly, another great they're a great pair together is a book, Same Side Selling, by a guy named Ian Altman. And that really changed my perspective, where it wasn't about, hey, how do I convince this person to do something, but more of, how do we think of this as a problem that we're both trying to solve, and we're on the same side, and now we're pitching our solution as a potential, our services as a potential solution to what it is that would solve your problem. And there's some great techniques in both of those books that I would recommend. And then on the improv side, there's a fantastic book called Improv Wisdom, written by Patricia Ryan Matson, which is, it's a little bit more softer. It's a little bit fluffier, but I still appreciate it much on the engineer side. But it was some of the life lessons that you can get from improvisation. And so if people were to take an improv class, or at least study a little bit more about improv, it's some of the things that you can learn and apply to your life outside of, performance, or even outside of the workplace, but just life wisdom.
Perfect. Last question. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
So I am on all the social media at Drew Tarvin. I recently I made a comment in another podcast where I was like, I am on Instagram, Drew Tarvin. I'm on Twitter, Drew Tarvin. I'm on Facebook, Drew Tarvin. On LinkedIn, Drew Tarvin. I think I still have a MySpace account, Drew Tarvin. Okay. I checked on that. I do actually still have a MySpace page. It's like a picture from like 2008. It's a terrible picture, but I'm like, I need to find my password and like update that. So all social media is Drew Tarvin, DrewTarvin. And then also the website Humor That Works is where all the resources are that they can, kind of find that. If they have any questions, certainly connect with me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at andrew@humorthatworks.com. Hopefully it's come across in my voice, but I'm incredibly passionate about what it is that I do. So if people have questions, or if they want to learn more, they need insight into something, more than happy to chat with people for sure.
The main takeaway I'm taking from this podcast is that if someone wants to see what you looked like 18 years ago or 19 years ago, they can go and check you out on MySpace.
Yeah, myspace.com/Drew Tarvin. You can see a picture of me and I think 2 other older comedians from a stand-up show or something. It's very bizarre.
Okay. Well, Andrew or Drew? I should have asked that at the start.
Both. So I go by, full name is Andrew, but I go by Drew because it's more efficient.
Okay. Well, Drew, thank you so much for your time. This was amazing. Yeah, I loved it.
For sure. And one last thing that I would plug for people to kind of listen to or to think about is, and this is what I encourage kind of all groups is, as you're thinking about using humor in the workplace, simply think 1 smile per hour. Think like, what's one thing that you can do each hour of the day that brings a smile to your face or the face of someone else? And that starts to help you develop a humor habit, right? It creates this process where you're like, okay, I'm going into a meeting for an hour. What's one thing that I can do? And over time, you'll stack that up. Like I said, it's an iterative approach, but that's an easy place to start. It doesn't have to be complicated about taking an improv class or reading a book, or those are all great things to do, but simply start with 1 smile per hour.
Perfect way to end this. Thank you, Andrew. Drew. And Drew, yeah. All right. Well, what do you guys think? I would love to know what you guys thought about this. So if you have any comments, any feedback, please let me know just jump on the show notes, WeTheSalesEngineers.com/show55, and put a comment and let me know what you think. We really focused the session on one skill that every SE should have. So Andrew is not a sales engineer, but he was an engineer, or is an engineer. I don't know. Once an engineer, always an engineer, I guess. Who may not have been as funny as he is today, but he worked on that skill. And now he helps other people get better at that skill. And I like the idea about the improv class specifically, mainly because we all have jokes that work in certain groups. For example, my jokes work more in like an engineering kind of group, a geeky kind of group. So it works there. But if I go and start talking to a VP somewhere, maybe they won't work. And the fact that the improv class is not, role specific or career specific, we would have to learn about creating jokes that would work for the everyday man or different people. So I think it's a great idea. Unfortunately, I currently don't have time to pursue an improv class, but it is something that will be on my bucket list. So again, I really hope you liked this. Let me know if you did or you didn't. I'm going to use this as an opportunity for me to understand if I should go after those types of guests, not specifically SEs, but have a certain skill that could help SEs. So let me know. Show notes, WeTheSalesEngineers.com/show55. And another thing before we go, I want to learn more about what you guys need versus what I want to tell you. So in order to do that, I'm going to be reaching out to 3 or 4 of my listeners per month to discuss how I can help you better or how I can make this podcast better for you or the blog better for you in any way. So I'll be reaching out to some of you who I have on my mailing list. So if you want to chat with me or you want the chance to chat with me, whatever that's worth, I recommend you subscribe. You can pretty much subscribe off of any page. With that, this is Ramsey signing off.